This is a series of 3 talks that will cover the Israel-Palestine issue since, for a long period of time. And the idea is to actually misspell or dispel a lot of the misconceptions and misunderstandings and distortions about the conflict. Because what happens, the title says contextualizing and redressing misconceptions. When you listen to the news, you talk to people, everything seems to be disjointed. There's no continuity. It's just like episodes without any connection to whatever, which makes it really hard to get a good understanding of what the issues and what motivates people to do what they do. So 3 days ago, May 15, is known as the Nakba Day, which actually translates, Nakba is the Arabic word, translates to catastrophe in English. And it commemorates the displacement and the expulsion of Palestinians and the establishment of the Zionist state in 1948. What has been unfolding in Gaza for the last 19 months has been characterized by the ICJ, the ICC, Amnesty International, and various international bodies and individuals as a genocide. For the media and the pundits and all these experts, history for them started on October 7. You keep hearing that. It's all the fault of October 7. History, in that case, like I mentioned already, starts whenever Palestinians do something, it seems. There's no continuity. And so this teach-in will aim at providing the historical context within which events unfold and find roots. So what we will be talking about is the causes, motives, and origins of the conflict. And I say conflict in quote unquote, right? So, because it is important that to formulate a good understanding of the present and various events, we have to really understand and get a grasp on the historical context. And there is nothing more telling about how misunderstandings develop than talking with various people. I'm always surprised at how little they know about the conflict or how distorted their understanding of that conflict is. So we will be talking here, in order to get to this understanding, we will be talking about the history, we'll talk about the present, and the future. Well, this will be a very, very long talk. So we're going to split it in 3 parts for that. This is the first of the series. So some of the statements that I often hear repeated over and over and over again over the last 40 years. Oh, well, the Arabs and Jews have been fighting each other for a very long time, and they will continue to do so until the end of time, right? And that Arab and Jews hate each other, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or it's all about religion. And this new thing now that has been developing, and it has been actually for a long time, but now it is at the forefront. Any criticism of Israel is characterized as motivated by anti-Semitism. And so this is the level of misunderstanding that I will be talking about in the first part of the series. So we'll examine these myths, and we will demonstrate that the conflict is not rooted in hatred between Jews and Arabs, and it has not been going on since the beginning of time, and that there are solutions. So we'll start with the first one, and that is the conflict is not between Jews and Arabs. And that's addressing the fallacy of the statement, Arabs and Jews hate each other. But in order to do that, we have to understand what do we mean by the terms. It's very, very important to realize that words have a meaning, and they fit within a certain framework, mental framework. And when you mention Jew, it fits within a certain framework. And when you mention Arab, it fits within a certain framework. This framework is distorted. And so we will try to find, and also a lot of people think Jew means Zionist. And Arabs means Muslim, you know. So we will examine those. So historically, Jew has always referred to people who believe in Judaism as a religion, and that Moses was the prophet of God, and he established that religion and led the people out of Egypt, and you know the history of that. So Judaism is a religion. Zionism, on the other hand, is a political movement that sought to transform Judaism from a religion to a nationality, right? And so why was that? Well, it was because of discrimination of Jews in Europe throughout history, since the Middle Ages until even the present, you know, or at least recent years. And the roots of this hatred was initially religious, okay? And I'm not gonna, pull punches. The Catholic Church instigated that, right? And why is it? This is important. Why is it that the church chose this group of people, the Jews, to persecute? Well, in the Middle Ages, who was in power? Who was holding the keys of power? It was the church, the Pope. And the church had control over adherents to Christianity. They can excommunicate them, they can threaten them, they can do whatever. So they were actually controlling them through their authority as religious leaders. The Jews were outside that control. You could not threaten them with excommunication, right? So how do you control people that you have no authority over? simply by turning them into pariahs. You direct, and that serves two purposes, okay? You exclude them from society, and by doing so, you can direct anger and hatred and all that stuff towards them because, hey, it's their fault. We see that happening today with immigrants, all right? Because, yeah, there are no jobs. Okay, well, blame the immigrants, the illegal immigrants. They're taking your jobs. It's the exact same thing. So because those Jews were excluded from society, and there are certain things that Christians were not allowed to do, especially dealing with finances, you know, usury, charging interest, and things like that. So the Jews were doing those things because, well, I mean, they didn't have to follow Christian teachings about usury, about other things. And so then this hatred towards the Jews took another character, which became social, right? They are the ones who are actually responsible for our ills. You know, they are charging too much interest. A good example for that, you see, Shakespeare, Merchant of Venice, right? That is a very telling story about how Europeans viewed Jews at the time. Bloodsuckers, basically, right? And then later on, this took a different perspective, and it became political, because Jews, as in later years, as people became more educated and more aware, and the age of the Enlightenment and all that stuff, you see, people started fighting for liberty, for justice, for things, and there's political aspects to all social structure. And so, especially when oppressed people ask for liberation, ask for justice, then the powers that be, well, will start characterize them as terrorists, as people who are bent on destroying society, and so on. So that's the background for the development of Zionism as a political movement, right? And the founder of this political movement was a guy by the name of Theodor Herzl, right? And Theodor Herzl was a journalist, playwright, attempted to write some novels and things like that. He was very mediocre at that, but anyways. So Herzl, and it's very, very, very interesting. Herzl himself was a non-religious, right? He did not practice Judaism as a religion. And actually, he had at some point called for the conversion of Jews to Christianity so that they can assimilate within their societies, right? He had no qualms about that, right? But there's an event that changed his mind, right? And that's the Dreyfus affair in France. Here is France, the proclaiming égalité, fraternité, liberté, equality, brotherhood, and freedom. And Dreyfus was a French officer that was put on trial on fake charges, on fabricated charges, and everybody knew he was scapegoated because he was Jewish. And so when Dreyfus realized, okay, here is France, supposedly the beacon of liberty and freedom and justice, putting a Jew on trial and convicting him because he was Jewish, well, there is no hope for the Jews to assimilate and gain any form of equality in Europe, right? And so he concluded that the Jews will never escape persecution, and therefore they have to leave. So he established his political movement in 1897, right? And he was, in the process, inspired and motivated by the rise of nationalism in Europe at that time. Because at that time, at the late 19th century, all these various empires that included all sorts of different people and different ethnicities were crumbling. And all these peoples who were how you say, subjects of those empires wanted to have their own independence and countries, especially in the Balkans and all that area. So that's what developed how, at that time, that's how nationalism was developed, I should say. And so Herzl was inspired by that, and he thought, okay, well, the Jews have been persecuted, it's because they are a different people. And so they are a different people, a different nation. Their presence in Europe is abnormal, and therefore they have to separate and create their state. And so he wrote this book, this pamphlet. It's called The Jewish State. How many of you read it or heard of it? See, I encourage everyone to read it because it is actually, I mean, it's just very telling. You will completely understand what are the motivations of Zionism in there. It's a small little thing, you know, it's not that big. And it's, he doesn't mince any words in there, okay? So, but the thing is, he realized, okay, well, yeah, we're gonna take all these Jews from Europe, all across Europe, mainly from Russia and Eastern Europe, but we're gonna take those Jews and we're gonna put them somewhere. Where? And in the Jewish state, he says, well, the location doesn't really matter. All he cared about was that that location would have to have the necessary ingredients or necessary components to form an independent and viable state. That's all he cared about. Argentina was under consideration. East Africa, Uganda, was under consideration. And excuse me? Yeah. And then Palestine also was under consideration. But yeah, he didn't really care. Now, what is interesting is that most Jews did not agree with him or did not accept Zionism for a very, very long time. This is a statement by Rabbi Elmer Berger from the American Council for Judaism. And it's very clear that for him and many religious Jews, they completely rejected Zionism as anathema to Judaism itself. Yes, the Jews have always longed for Palestine, for the Holy Land. And yes, they do believe that at some point, at the end of times, they will be gathered in there. But not as a people, in the sense of what we understand people today as an ethnicity or race or anything like that, but as people, a group of people of faith. But they also believe that no human being will achieve that. This will happen by the will of God and when the Messiah comes. It's not the creation of a man or a woman or a human being. You know. So they rejected that. Okay, now we're going to talk about Jews and what is Judaism and the relation with Zionism. Okay, what's an Arab? How many of you think Arab means Muslim? Don't be shy. Yeah. Arab, the word Arab means actually, it's an old Nabatean word. Nabatean is a language, is a Semitic language derived and contemporary to Aramaic. And Arab referred to, there are two meanings for it actually. First meaning refers to nomadic people. And to this day, Bedouins or nomadic Arabs living in Jordan, southern Palestine, Saudi Arabia, those tribes, those nomadic people, they refer to themselves as the true Arabs. Everybody else living in the cities and all that stuff, they are fake Arabs because they are sedentary. They are not nomadic peoples. So that's one meaning for it. The other meaning is somebody who speaks an understandable language. And because at that time, those nomadic tribes spoke actually Nabatean. And the Nabateans could actually understand them. And that was the word Arab for them. So they are nomadic people, but also they have the advantage of speaking a language that they understand. So Arab, now later on, Arab refers to people who speak the Arabic language and who culturally adopted the customs and culture of that area in the Middle East, including all these Arab countries. Now, it's very interesting because, you know, I speak Arabic. Well, I speak two languages actually in Arabic. I speak the Palestinian dialect, but also classical Arabic. Classical Arabic is the common language that all Arabs from Morocco all the way to the Gulf states understand. This is the language of the Quran. And it is the written language. The dialect languages are not written, they are spoken. And so when I say Arabic language, I mean actually the classical Arabic language. And so Arab is, or being an Arab refers to a cultural identity. It's not racial, it's not an ethnic, or does not have a religious meaning. Actually, where is the largest Muslim population of the world, in the world today? Indonesia, Malaysia, Southeast Asia. They way outnumber Arab Muslims. A quarter of Palestinians actually are Christian. And Jews have always lived in that area. Not simply Palestine, there were Jews all over the Middle East. In Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, North Africa, and actually the golden age of Judaism in modern times was in Spain under Islamic rule. That's where Maimonides, one of the great thinkers of Judaism, was born and lived. And when the Muslims were kicked out of Spain, the Jews went along with them. Because what followed was the Inquisition. And we know what that did, right? So we talked about the persecution of Jews in Europe. There is no equivalence to that in the Muslim world. It's true that the Muslims and Christians, they were referred to as dhimmi. This is an Arabic word, which means actually that they are under the protection of Muslims. Jews and Christians are considered by Muslims as people of the book, referred to as people of the book, which means that actually that they worship the same God as Muslims. They have received the message of God, but they have not really fulfilled their faith because they deviated and they have not accepted Muhammad as a prophet. However, because they do believe in the same God, they are respected. And they should be allowed to worship, and living under Islamic rule, they are supposed to be protected. They were not equal to Muslim. They were kind of second-class citizens, if you want, but there was never this level of persecution as was present or that the Jews experienced in Europe and especially in Eastern Europe. Right. And that is one reason actually why Zionism did not develop among those Jewish population in the Middle East. And so Jews, like I said, lived and among Arabs, a lot of them consider themselves to be Arab. Ella Shohat, for example, she's a professor of cultural studies at NYU, and she refers to herself as an Arab Jew, or more specifically, an Iraqi Israeli. And Professor Avi Shleim, He's a professor of history, and he authored many books about the issue, about Palestine. And his family was in Iraq, and they were immigrated to Israel after its creation. And he specifically here talks about his Arab heritage, that they consider themselves Arabic, and their customs, their food, and all that stuff. And more importantly, just a few years ago, actually, there's another Iraqi Jew, Samir Nakash, his name. When you hear Samir Nakash, you see that doesn't sound Jewish at all. Sounds purely a Muslim or Christian name, or it's an Arab name, Samir Nakash. He's an author, and he was actually forced out of Baghdad and went to Israel. And he was an author, and all his books were written in Arabic, and only in Arabic. He refused to write in Hebrew. And he said that because that's the language that his mother tongue, that's the language he grew up with, and that's the language that he can most clearly and succinctly express himself. So he wrote only in Arabic. His books had to be translated to Hebrew. So yeah, so we mentioned, I took a little bit detour here, and well, let's get back on track. So Herzl wanted to establish his state, but the question is where and how. We talked about the different options that were presented to him: Argentina, Uganda, Madagascar, Palestine, anywhere, really, didn't matter. But the essential thing is that, well, he can't achieve his goal if he did not have a sponsor. And so he clearly says in his Jewish state, and he realized that, right? And he realized because those territories were controlled by somebody else. They had also people living in them or on them. So he says the society of the Jews will have to treat with the present masters of the land and put itself under the protection of European powers. So, and that is from the Jewish state. So he clearly realized that in order to achieve his plan, he needs the protection and the interference and the cooperation of different powers. And also, this is from his diary, that how he's going to achieve that is by expropriating property from the owners. Expropriation here does not necessarily mean stealing or taking away forcefully. It means simply transferring the title or the ownership of the land, either through purchase or forcefully, you know. And more importantly, you see, you cannot establish a state on land where there is a large amount of people and call it a Jewish state. Listen, yeah. So you'll have to get rid of those people. And so he clearly says that, well, we'll have to get those poor people, meaning who? The working class people. People who have to work the land to survive, or people who simply have to work them out and deprive them from work in our country. And more importantly, this, once we get control and own a piece of land, we will never give it back. So, and we'll see later in the next part that actually this is happening today. This is, he put that in practice. And so this is the area we're talking about here. Sorry, the pointer doesn't work on these. So this is the Ottoman Empire. Until 16 or 1683, the Ottoman Empire spanned all this area here, from all the way from North Africa into the Arabian Peninsula and all the way up to Central Eastern Europe, Hungary and all that stuff. In 1914, at the eve of World War I, like I mentioned, the empires were kind of shrinking and dwindling, and so it had the Ottoman Empire had some financial difficulties. People were freeing themselves, and so it shrank, and by 1914, that's the area it covered right here. So this will set the stage for part 2 of the talk, which will be World War I and the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire that took place as a result of that. So that's the end of part 1. Part 2 will be, when is that? In June, I think? June, yeah. It's unfortunate we couldn't have it sooner because this place is busy, which is good, you know. So we'll be in June, and we will talk about the World War I, the colonialism, basically, Sykes-Picot Plan, and the Balfour Declaration, which set the stage for the creation of Israel and all that stuff. So now we open it for questions. Of who? Oh, yeah, that will be in part 3. I mean, but there, I mean, you see okay, so the problem with a system like Israel parliamentary system is that small parties actually can have a huge impact, because especially if there is no party that can actually form a government by itself, because they don't have the necessary votes. So they have to form coalitions, right? And what happens is that these smaller parties then become more important, because they can actually then, how you say, force their point of view on the government. And that's exactly what's happening. Ben-Gvir and all the current, basically all the current Israeli government is catering to the settlers. And their plan is basically that all of Palestine is actually the land of Israel, and they have to get the Palestinians out and all that stuff. We'll talk more about that in the next 2 series. Yes? Which one? This one?
The owners of immovable property believe they are cheating us, make them think they're cheating us, selling us things for more than they are worth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happens is, okay. Boy, there's a lot of things to talk about here. All right, most of the land in Palestine, and not only in Palestine, but Lebanon, Syria, and all that stuff, under the Ottoman Empire, a lot of the land, very little land was owned privately by somebody. Most of the land was communal, and villages controlled large area of land, and then people would work this land, and parcels were allocated for each family depending on the the members of the family, how many members they have, how many people they have. So it was communal property. But then the Ottoman Empire introduced all these reforms and wanted to encourage private property of land, and sold or gave this land to big feudal families. Most of them lived in Lebanon, Syria, whatever. They never worked the land, but they were influential enough to get those grants. So, and then when the early Zionists started coming and immigrating into Palestine, they sought to purchase this land. Okay, and so
from the feudal folks.
From the feudal folks, exactly. And so the prices, of course, there was demand for land, and so the prices jacked up. And Herzl saying here that he's willing to pay much more than what the land is worth,
So
simply to have it,
yeah,
so that
like
they can
stock
control
market,
it
yeah.
and never give it back again.
All that effort to purchase the land by the Jews before the establishment of Israel was no more than 7%, right?
Right.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
It was not huge. No, it was not huge. At the time, you see, it's really interesting. The Jewish population in Palestine until 1914 was about, it increased from, the population of Palestine was about 10, 11% Jewish in 1914. And they owned less than 10% of the land of Palestine.
okay, and why have I heard that expression in the 1917 Balfour Declaration that mentions Jews being, referring to the non-Jews as 97%?
Yeah, you're foreshadowing what I was going to say. You see, okay, the Balfour Declaration. Okay, let's talk about it, and we'll talk about it next time. Here's the Balfour Declaration. And, okay, so what he says, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. All right. This is a typical Orientalist, colonialist view. All right? Indigenous peoples, especially non-European, they have no political rights. They don't exist. They are savages. You see, they are savages. And it is our responsibility as the civilized world to teach them and to tell them what's best for them. This is a typical, it's repeated over and over again all over the world. When indigenous peoples are colonized, this is the argument that is used. You have no political rights. Simply, you exist as a non-Christian, non-Jewish, non-whatever, like a savage. And we're going to tell you what to do. Exactly. So that's typically what happens. In 1917, the land ownership was less than 10%. And I'll have some maps to show that, you see, which I don't have right now in the slide. So that is typical. So thank you for,
Yep. Do you have Do you have Herzl's dates? And does this work?
Yeah, it's working.
Oh, and wasn't he more liberal until he became the nationalist idea in about 1895?
Exactly.
And then it got to be hardcore and taking property. And corollary to that, wasn't Lebanon the most pluralist and liberal society in the entire region during that period of time?
No, that's exactly true. I mean, Herzl, like I did mention that in the talk, that Herzl was an assimilationist. He was totally liberal, and he didn't care about religion whatsoever, you see, and he never thought of the Jews as people. Zionism, religious Zionism existed way before Herzl, okay? And a lot of Jews left Europe and moved to Palestine, religious Jews, that is, towards the end of their life, because they wanted to die in the Holy Land, basically, right? So Herzl didn't care about those people. He was totally liberal and totally European, Western European, right? And because there's a difference in the treatment of Western Jews as opposed to Eastern Jews. Western Jews gained a lot more freedom and liberty after the Enlightenment and the establishment of republics and modern states and things like that. That doesn't mean that anti-Semitism disappeared, still existed. But in Eastern Europe, the Jews were totally contained within areas, the Pale of Settlements, where they are not allowed to work land, you see. And that's one reason why land purchases became important for the Zionists, is because most of those Zionists who came to Palestine were from Eastern Europe. And they wanted, and working the land and working agriculture, growing things, was their way to affirm their humanity once again and regain their humanity, because they were forbidden to do that in Eastern Europe. Right? And so Herzl, the Dreyfus affair, what changed his mind, is because this happened in Western Europe, in France, where the officer was scapegoated because he was Jewish. Exactly.
Thing or two about colonialism.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I don't know whether you're aware, but either Saturday New York Times or today's New York Times, there is a major report reporting on the collaboration of Project 225 with Project Esther with some details. I read it this morning and I highly recommend reading it. It is significant because it has appeared in the New York Times. So, yeah, look it up. Thank you. Project Esther is oh boy, it is named after Queen Esther in this apparently fictional narrative in which the King Xerxes of Persia, who is married to Queen Esther, decides to supposedly annihilate or persecute Jews, but then the Jews triumph over, and in the book of Esther, it says they killed 75,000 Persians. So there was a Holocaust, if we were to believe the Project Esther, but I mean the Book of Esther. But the purpose is to normalize genocide, to say this is something that genocide means victory, and that's anti-Semitic to the absolute core.
So I have a question about, maybe I missed it at the very beginning, about the history of the word Semite. And I'm foggy in my brain about it. I read a little about coming from the word, or the mythological person Shem. Perhaps it was a kingdom or a group of people where then all of a sudden Judaism split off from the original way back, way back.
There's no such thing as Semitic people. There are Semitic languages, such as Aramaic, such as Phoenician, such as Arabic, such as Hebrew. No, and then later, it was used by racists to refer to people who spoke those languages, and particularly Hebrew. All right. Let's see. We have a couple more questions. Yeah. 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 We have a couple more questions. We have to wrap up pretty soon. Yes, please.
mentioned that religious Zionism existed before Herzl. Could you please say more?
Excuse me?
Could you please say more on that subject?
Yeah, I mean, there was, like I said, I mean, Jews had this longing to the Holy Land for a very long time, right? And which is kind of the same connection as Muslims and Christians have to the Holy Land, right? And so there's this movement, especially because of the persecution that Jews were experiencing in Europe, there was this movement or this idea that we should leave and go to the Holy Land, right? But not necessarily to create a separate independent state, you see, but more than to live there, to be close to the holy sites, you see, and escape the persecution. They were not necessarily aiming at establishing a state. That's what distinguishes political Zionism from religious one. One is motivated purely by political, ethnic, nationalistic views, and the other is motivated by religious beliefs, and not necessarily by establishing a separate racist entity. Well, that's a good question. I mean, but yeah, it's very hard to argue with God, right? You can't argue with God. You have to accept what God says. And somebody smart enough that can take any text and transform it and twist it